everyone. Today we're going to dive into a topic I believe will resonate deeply with you all. So I want you to imagine that if you could travel back in time to the beginning of your career, what advice would you give your younger self? What wisdom would you share that could have changed the course of your journey? We're joined by someone who has walked that very path, and he has made incredible strides in our field, Dr. Michael DeLuke, who has spent 18 years as a practicing orthodontist and is now the founder and the driving force behind the Ortho Coach. And he's bringing a fresh perspective and new strategies to help us not just reflect on our past, but also redefine our future. So today we are going to challenge you to think critically about your journey in private practice. What could you have done differently? What lessons have you learned? And how can you use that insight to evaluate your practice today? Most importantly, how can we share our stories, trials, and tribulations to guide and inspire the next generation of orthodontists? Let's explore these questions together and discover how we can transform our experience into powerful tools for growth, innovation, and mentorship. Let's get started. Hi, Dr. DeLuke. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you, Lorraine. Thanks so much for having me on.
Super excited about this. You know, what I'm finding as we're making our way through all these different Dear Younger Self series, each doctor that's coming on board has just such very different ideas of what they would say to their younger self. Yeah. You know, I want you to think about yourself. What age would you have opened your first practice?
29, maybe 28, just about to turn 29, right around
right there. So just put yourself there for a moment and say, okay, what words of wisdom would I give myself if I was doing this all over again to maybe have a different outcome or just to have an easier road? So I know one of the things that you talked about, which is sort of near and dear to my heart, we here within Retainers for Life, we call them standard operating procedures.
SOPs,
and I have sort of like, I'm a thorn in everybody's side where I'm constantly saying, get on it. You know, it's one of those things when you sit down to do it, it's ginormous.
Yep.
And it's something that you talked about that I never really equated to an orthodontic practice, but of course, that makes sense. So tell me more about that, because that was one of the things that we had talked about previously.
Yeah, I think it's essential for any business, as you said, especially an orthodontic practice. And I learned this the hard way. So many probably know my story by now, but I started my own practice within a week of finishing my residency at UConn in the early 2000s. And I had built over the second and third year of my residency, once I decided I was going to start my own practice, I had started to build some protocols and SOPs, but I had never done this before. I didn't know really what I was building. My wife is an OT, so she helps with a lot of the organizational thought processes and kind of helped me to streamline my thinking a little bit, but we still had never run an orthodontic practice. So when I got into practice, I had instructions for the patients, right? I had oral hygiene instructions and caring for your herbs or your expander, whatever the case was. And I had some basic instructions, a team, we called it our playbook, but a staff manual, because I knew from a medical legal perspective, you have to have certain things in an HR perspective in place, both for the patients and for the staff and the team. So I thought I had it, right? So I go out, I think this is it. I've got the patient forms, I've got, scheduling, like if the patients had to schedule a certain visit sequence, we had a form for that. And we thought we had it. Well, then you start doing it and you realize, for the patient side, it's kind of easy. It's easy just to make another form. You adjust your process or your protocol or your appliances, and you can just tweak it. For the team, it's a whole nother ball game. And when they sign that playbook, in our case, or I'll refer to as manual from here on in, so everyone knows what I'm talking about with a common term, but we'd have our manual. And when they would sign it, we realize a couple of years in, as you then start having more people on your team and you start having more requests for vacation and more requests for exceptions, and you start to realize, okay, now we've got to add this and now we've got to add this. So that was the first level of realization that I needed to have more detailed protocols and processes. with the manual. And I encourage every doc out there have a robust manual that is as buttoned up as it can be, because some team member at some point will challenge something in there, even if it's down to the length of the fingernails in the clinic, right? Or I mean, there's just, you have to think of these things, because that becomes an issue. And it's really nice to just say, well, per page 23 on the playbook, this is not acceptable. The second part of that is your more standard operating procedures for how you do what you do in your day. And we divided that into a clinical and a front end team. We called the FEEDM, front end team member. So the FEEDM team manual and the clinical, the CA manual. And so my wife handled building a lot of the front end, and I would help, and conversely, I would handle the clinical and she would kind of help. And we really built insanely robust protocols to the point that it literally, like, we had in our kitchen staff room a coffee maker, an industrial sort of coffee maker, and we made Starbucks coffee, and it literally above it had a laminated instruction sheet on how to make the coffee. I mean, we had everything standardized. And honestly, Lorraine, it wasn't it was only because we realized when team member A was out, if team member A was out and she's the one who made the coffee, no one knew how to make the coffee. And
so B, C, and D team members got no coffee.
I mean, the bigger part, yes, but the patients would come in at 8. Patients would show up at 8 o'clock, and they were looking forward to. We had Tazo teas and coffee, so we had hot water, and coffee, and people came in excited about it. And so one or two times, patients come in, and you hear, be in my office in the back, and I hear a patient come in and say, where's the coffee? And my blood pressure starts rising. I'm like, what happened? Well, team member wasn't in. So you need the protocol for that, the standard operating procedure. And then it can get very detailed. I mean, we had Renee built for the front end, a new patient call protocol that was unbelievable. I mean, it was a flow chart essentially of where to take things from different team members, from different patient calls based on the needs of that particular patient or parent. And it really incorporated getting all the information we could get from them, so we could really have a good background for when they did come in as well. And then in the clinic, everything was standardized. So every single setup had a picture numbered with the numbers on the side of every single instrument, down to the number of cotton rolls that got set out for that procedure. It was a thick workbook, and it was all separated by procedure type. So bonding, debonding, progress bonding, Invisalign, clear aligners, whatever. It was a process. And as you said, it takes a tremendous amount of work to build those. We had standardization on the camera settings. You had to use the exact camera settings. You had to stand at an exact point when you took those pictures, so the lighting was perfect. Everything was standardized. So it does a few things when you do that. And I know it's a lot of work to do it. One of the things it does is it really does make it nice for, if a team member is out, that you don't have the same level of stress, and the team, not just you, the doc, the team don't have the same level of stress, because team member A is out, team member B can go be like, oh yeah, just pull the protocol and figure it out. It's not that challenging. The other thing it does is it holds everybody to the same standard. And that was something I didn't know was going to happen. So again, talking about the things you learn, once I built this, I didn't understand that was going to have that effect. But then when we would train a new team member, we always had this, because what happened early in my career was Susie would train Sally, and Sally would train Mary, and then Susie and Mary would do it totally differently, because by the time it went from Susie to Sally to Mary, it had totally been changed. So you go to Mary and say, Mary, why are you doing it this way? She's like, well, Sally told me to do this. And Susie's like, well, or Sally says, well, Susie told me to do this. And you're like, and it's finger pointing, right? Everybody's like, well, it's her fault or his fault, or whatever the case may be. Stop that. Because if Mary did it wrong, the clinical lead or front end team or whoever it was, or myself or Renee, could go and say, Mary, I noticed this was done this way. Why was it done this way? Well, that's what I thought I was supposed to do. Well, what does the protocol say? And it ends it. It ends it. And they would say, I don't know. And then that's a training opportunity, right?
Well, absolutely.
Don't know the protocol. And we had a whole process. I won't get into the great detail of it for the sake of brevity, but where when they were trained, they had to get checked off in a workbook on which protocols, which chapters they had gone through. So we knew, okay, they're trained in all these protocols. So if Mary was signed off on that protocol and Mary did it incorrectly, then Mary's not going by the protocol.
Right.
And now we're not going back to Sally or Susie and getting them involved in it at all, because it saved so much intra-staff tension and turmoil. And you could address that issue with that team member. And the last part we did on that, which is taking it to the next step, is we had all these protocols: opening the records room, clean up the coffee. I'd said, who even opens the lab or gets the 3D printers warmed up, all the different things you need to do and how you do that. But then who does that?
Who's responsible?
Who's responsible? Because some of these are protocols that are just like a clinical assistant. Every clinical assistant took records in my practice, so everyone was trained on the records protocol. So they could just jump in interchangeably if one wasn't there. But not everyone did something, say, with the lab, or not everyone opened the locked basement door where deliveries came in, right? So that was the next thing you find out, is when team member A is not there, all of a sudden, well, who's unlocking the front door? Who's unlocking the back door for the lab, or for the deliveries? So you have all of these things that don't get done, and next thing you know, you got a delivery guy banging on the door, coming into your clinic with boxes. And so we started to say, well, how do we fix this? Well, we built what we called our responsibilities list. And what that did is, our responsibilities list was literally a list, and we did it by start of day, midday or during the day, end of day. Okay. And then we had start a week, end a week, and then weekly, monthly, and then other variability as far as intervals, because there's all these different times that you have to, clean the suction lines and run the lines and do all these, clean the sterilizers, purge the water from the sterilizers. And some of these are daily, some are weekly, some are monthly, maintenance of certain equipment. And so we had to create a way to make sure that if you had turnover or a team member wasn't there, that these things got done. So if team member A is not there, all they do, if it was a clinical team member, the other clinicians would do it. If it was a front-end team member, the other front-end team members would do it. It was a Google Doc we had shared with everybody. They just go to team member A's responsibilities list. They open it, and they all split it up and divide it. And it's a great team building thing. Maybe team member A had 10 things on that list in the morning. Last example I'll give, which used to make my blood boil before I figured this out. I'd be sitting there working on a patient. We had TVs up on the ceiling. And so I'd be sitting there, and I didn't always look up necessarily at what's going on in the first patient. So I'd sit down, first patient come in, and they'd be like, oh, why the TV's not on? Well, what happened was we didn't have a responsibilities list, because what happened was that with the team member whose job it was to get the TVs on and the video playing wasn't there that morning. And so the other team members, because it's kind of out of sight, they might remember to open the blinds or do some of the other things on her list, but they wouldn't remember everything. And so once we got that responsibilities list dialed in, then those things literally stopped happening. And, they didn't go through until everybody's list is checked off at that point. So I know it's a brief summary of it, and there's a lot of different points there, but the key is have defined have a great manual and rules, and then have defined standard operating procedures for each thing you do in your office, front end and clinical, and then have responsibilities lists where each team member is assigned certain specific responsibilities. And the last thing on that is that also makes sure that Sally doesn't feel like she's doing everything and Susie, it does nothing. And that happens all the time in offices, any type of business. It's like, well, I'm always the one here early opening, and I'm always the one here late closing. Well, when you have a responsibilities list and Susie says that, you just say, well, let's look at your list. And it's out of balance. Let's take a couple things off yours and give them to some of the other team members who are leaving earlier. And so those are things that I learned, I learned all those the hard way. As I'm retelling the stories, I'm thinking of times I can see faces, like the people that taught me these lessons for better or for worse. But once we got that dialed in later, my second half of my career, oh man, it was such a game changer.
Yes. And the first thing that you said was, I know it's a tremendous amount of work, but if you think about all of the efficiencies that it created versus people, mass confusion, it's not my job, whispers down the lane. That's what I call the point, the pointing of fingers, whispers down the lane. It just changes and changes. And you thought, on day one, we were very clear, but 2 years later, it's morphed itself, right,
Yes.
into something
Yes.
different due to whispers down the lane.
Yep.
And by the way, I especially love the responsibilities chart.
Mm.
And I think many times when you look at someone else in the clinic, that it seems, or even within any company, it seems that they do less. But when it's really on a visual concept, on a piece
Mm.
of paper, and you see very clearly that it is quite, it's just different,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Those conversations are gone as well. You know what interests me about that? Is that something that is covered in school for orthodontists? Or again, is this sort of like a little pocket that just comes from just sort of, jump into it and figure it out scenario?
Yeah, it is not offered in any capacity in
Mm,
schooling. Sadly, we get no training.
hmm
I mean, I can't say 100% of the residencies, but any of the ones I've ever interacted with, and
mm,
I guest lecture. I have a guest lecture at one tomorrow, and I do interact with the residents quite a bit in the current
hmm
capacity I'm in. Every one of them says the same thing to me. Where I teach at Nova, I know that's the case. They're so busy with the academics and the
Yeah.
research and the didactics that there's not, and patient care, there's just
Mhm.
not a window where they're learning anything more than the kind of the part-time. If I find if residents have some good part-timers that are outside clinicians and private practice, and they give them
Mhm.
some pearls, they can learn
Yeah.
these things. But as
Yeah.
far as actually part of the educational curriculum, it is not.
Right. Right. But all the more reason for webinars like this, so we can
Yeah.
put that in front of our sort of up and coming orthodontists, because like, wow, that's a huge learning curve.
Mm,
And to go into private practice for the first time, understanding that there's a world there that needs to be paid attention to.
yeah.
And allowing moments in time for people to reach out to someone like yourself to say,
Mm,
I was listening to that. I'm curious as to like what kind of software, like how did you hold it all together? Was
mm.
there tech or software that you used?
We didn't use our orthodontic software for that because it's just not robust enough. There's
Right.
reminder systems and all that, but they're not built for that. So we built Google Doc spreadsheets, and it
Yeah.
was part of our platform that we had a Google Doc account. And so everybody in my practice team member had a Google Doc email that was their practice email, not personal, their practice email.
Mhm.
And they would log in with that. And that would be how we'd access these sheets from
Mhm.
everyone at that time. And as actually we're going through this discussion, that's a great point. You're actually making me think for my podcast, I should really do a couple of just episodes here and there on just giving some of these pearls out and going over 15, 20 minutes and just run through some of this. I could show some pictures of it. And if I end up doing that, we
Yeah.
can get them. I'll let you know and kind of
Yeah.
link it up to this
I'll
as
make
well.
sure
If
that
I
it gets on the desk for sure.
Because I could show people
Um,
some still shots and pictures. I do have the responsibilities list on my
mhm.
website. So if
Yeah.
people go to theorthocoach.com, I think it's under blogs. I did it when I started this platform a couple of years ago. And it's on there, and I think it's under a blog, and it says like whose responsibility is it or
Mhm.
something like that. And they can see a
Mhm.
little view of what a sample looks like if they want to kind of get a
No, I
visual.
think that's a great idea. And then, I mean, just to leave that topic, but one thing that popped inside my head was the efficiencies of onboarding new people, right?
Yep.
It's like, yes, it's reading, and maybe did you break it down into sort of like modules? It's like, all
Yep.
right, you'll
Exactly.
do, and like you have to say, okay, I sign off that
Yep.
I understood it and I read it and I
Yep.
don't have any questions.
Yep.
Yes, I mean, again, it comes down to holding people responsible, not necessarily for you to tell them everything, but a way for them to get up to speed, educate themselves. And I think that really, takes us nicely sort of into another topic where you had talked about sort of one of those lessons there, one of those pearls that you would share with yourself. You talked about a job well done
Mm.
versus like production-based bonuses. And I
Yeah.
think that's a really nice little segue into that, because that sort of sits side by side with holding your staff responsible,
Yep.
right? So
Yep.
tell us more about that.
So as I was going through practice, and as you're doing this, you hear consultants and some have great ideas on this, and it's in no way. I think consultants are super valuable. In no way am I saying they're not. that being said, is no consultant is going to do it necessarily perfectly for your individual practice. They're going to give you general tips and pearls and things that will help you, but then you have to take what they say and you have to figure out how to apply it in your world. And it's just not possible for most consultants to develop a platform where they are able to customize every single thing. So we worked with some consultants and tried to figure things out, but then some things work, some things don't work. And sometimes it's just the docs implementing it. They might just not get it that well.
Yeah.
So one of the things I tried that I'd recommended from a couple of different people was sort of an incentive-based, production-based bonus system. So early on, I was of the belief that you don't just give like a Christmas bonus or a end of year bonus, because people then count on it. Everyone's seen National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, right?
Yes.
Dark Art. You already built the pool, right? I mean, you count on this stuff, and then if they don't get it, then they're disappointed.
Yeah.
And so they expect this as part of their compensation. So to me, that's not a reward or an incentive. That's an expectation. And I'm not saying we didn't give them Christmas presents and gifts and you know, a little like something extra at the end of the year, but that wasn't their bonus. That wasn't their raise. What we did is we started by tying it to practice production. Well, my practice was growing through its initial 10, 12, 15 years, and it's just growing. I had a lot of happy campers on my team because, you know, we're growing huge percentages year over year, and they're getting a cut of this as a bonus. And it was, it was nice. Well, then, as I've talked about to you before and on your platform before, I reached a point where I needed to bring an associate doc in. I was doing, as Chris Benson said, when he valued my practice, the work of 2.5 to 3 orthodontists myself. And I realized I just couldn't keep growing until I got another doctor, until I figured this out, to have some distribution of my time and resources. And so I stopped trying to increase. We just capped off at the volume we were doing. And yes, our fees went up year over year. So there were some increases in production, but it wasn't what we had been seeing before. Now you have some unhappy campers on your team, and they're thinking, well, you know, why is it's not our fault you decided to slow this down.
Yeah.
The other part is as you're increasing more and more, some people are really motivated and driven by getting more people in to start and in treatment to help their bottom line in the bonus system. Some people are not. They don't want to go any faster. They don't want to work any harder. And I'm not being critical of them. That's just, they're going at their max cap. They're at their max speed. They're driving they're driving down the highway at 70. People are going 90, and they're just like, I'm not comfortable with 90. Like, I like doing 70. I don't need to do 40, but I like 70. So what happened was you took all those people who were comfortable at 70 and you're pushing them to try to go 90. And then there was some division between the team members of the ones who want to go 90 are like, why are the ones that are going 70 not trying to get this start squeezed in at the end of the day or whatever it might be?
Right.
That was another challenge with it. So through this, Renee and I developed what we coined the job well done, the JWD process. And so what that was is we just tried to, it's kind of like the whale done philosophy. People might have read that book, Whale Done, where you reward the whale. You know, the way you get a whale to jump out of the water through a hoop is you start with them jumping through it in the water and reward them when they go through it. And then you just keep raising it up a little bit more and they'll keep getting through it. It's an incentive reward system as opposed to that's directly tied to that individual's acts as opposed to the whole team. Right. Because other team members would be like, well, we didn't meet our production, but that's because so-and-so was, you know, not bringing it this past month and they weren't trying as hard. And so that eliminated that. And what we started doing is focusing on noticing when a team member was going above and beyond for the good of the practice, another team member, a specific patient, whatever the case might be. So let's say you hold an event at a local ice cream shop, right? You're doing a get together for patients and families, and that team member just, you know, everyone's kind of involved, but there's one team member that just really, I mean, they're really going above and beyond. They're making little goodie bags. They're doing all this stuff. Well, they would get a JWD for that. And it can be $100, a couple $100. Sometimes we do them for $20. And then sometimes we would say, if we had like a great month in the practice or accounts or delinquencies where, you know, like ours were really, really low at 0.02%. I mean, Renee was amazing at keeping those down. So if we had those really low for like a certain number of months in a row, the financial side, they would get a little, you know, we'd give each of them a little bit, say, hey, look, you guys did amazing calling on some of those older accounts, or maybe it was just one account that you've been tracking for like, you know, 4 or 5 months and they finally pay. Throw a
Yeah.
little JWD to your financial coordinator, throw $50, $100 just to say, hey, look, I know you've been busting your butt trying to get this done and stayed on it. We really appreciate that. So
Mhm.
what it does is it's the whale jumping through the hoop and getting a prize. They did something, it's tangible at that moment. They had direct control over it, right? It's not tied to the treatment coordinator at that point, right? It's
Mhm.
not like, well, she's
Mhm.
not doing her part getting people to start. And at the end of the year, so it makes all of them want to look for opportunities to go above and beyond and get caught doing it, right?
Yeah.
They want to get caught by you or the manager or the directors in your practice because
Mhm.
they now will do that. So it does require more responsibility on the
Yeah.
leaders in practice because you got to
Yes.
have your eyes peeled because you can't just be like forgetting. So I would always be looking for, as would Renee, be looking for opportunities to give them these. And,
Mhm.
they would have some people, right at the end of the year, people were getting a few $1,000s. Some would
Yeah.
add up, like the ones
Yeah.
who were really working. So they got some nice
Yeah.
JWDs throughout the year and just got added to their payroll that next time. We'd send them a nice email that would say, you know, we noticed that you did a great job with whatever it was. We really
Mhm.
value and appreciate that type of dedication, effort, whatever the case might be. It wasn't it was a custom email, not like a form email. I would
Right.
I would often, or Renee, we would type them personally to them and just say, we really appreciate what you've done. And for that, you'll receive a X dollar JWD bonus. And that brings your total for the year to, because a lot of times they don't realize just how much they've racked up. And then they
Right.
see that number like $1,540. And they're like,
Wow.
and that
Yes.
speaks to them. So these are the things that
Yes.
in my next phase of doc, Renee and I are going to go out and teach on a bigger scale and help practices implement. But these are a lot of the things we did over the years that, when again, the point of you saying this, tell your younger self and what you could learn.
Right.
Man, the stress I went through on bonuses over the years and just the
Yeah.
headache and the team dissension and it was just so much stress. And once we did this, no system's perfect, but boy,
Right.
it was nice. It felt good too. Because
Yeah.
it feels good to catch them doing good things instead
Yeah.
of just
Yeah.
focusing, especially orthodontists. We're so focused on perfection and everybody doing it just right that I
Mhm.
know a lot of times I would push team members to get everything just right, and that could be hard on them. But it was, so they really appreciated it when I would say, wow, we just had a crazy day before we used retainers for life, and we would get a summer and have like 8 patients call with, in the afternoon, like, we are going back to school, need retainers like by tomorrow
Right.
morning. And you have a team member be like, I got it. I'll print them out. I'll get them on the
Yeah.
decks. I'll get them. And they
Yeah.
do it without a question. Well, that's a JWD moment, give
Yeah.
that person $100 for
Yeah.
just staying a little late and doing that. And it
Yeah.
gets to be fun. So
Yeah. And that's huge. I mean, to the happiness of the people that sit inside your practice that come to work every day and they're not, and, it frees you up from, why did she get more than me? I work
yes.
just as hard as you. So those conversations are somewhat gone.
Yep.
What we do is we actually allow other team members to highlight things that perhaps I might not see and
Mm,
say, I want to call attention and shine a light on this person.
mm-hmm.
And, a lot of what we do, because we're a startup, so, even 5 years into it, we're still classed as a startup,
Yep.
is we just send little gifts. So we'll do little
Mm,
Amazon gift.
that's nice.
And it's just that little surprise that sits at the door. And it's just amazing. In fact, one day I had a pretty bad day and I shared it with someone. And later that night, someone knocked at my front door and Uber Eats had brought me ice cream.
Oh, wow. That's
It's
great. What a
just such
culture you're building.
simple things of
Yeah.
being appreciated, just adds to the joy of working with people, right? So, I
Yes.
mean, gosh, it's such a shame to me that we don't learn that earlier,
Mm,
right? That it takes so long for us to realize that we have to appreciate each other. So
yep.
I think that's amazing. Um, so you were in practice. Now you've got standard operating procedures, you've got the JWD, which I'm in love with, but you also we're talking a little bit about your core values. And that sort
Yeah.
of, again, I think it blends very well into, the culture of your practice
Yep.
and the power of a solid culture in propelling your practice forward, right?
Yep.
So did that start with core values? Do you believe that that's sort of the direction you would come from core values equals good culture? I mean, would you agree with that?
I would. It holds everybody to the same standard. And
Yeah.
that's one thing that again, early on in the game, I expected them to, I felt like if I were to embody these values,
Mm,
I didn't say them at that point. We didn't put them on the walls. We did it eventually at that point. If I didn't feel like I had to say them or define them, I could just lead by example.
mhm,
And that'll work for some team members, but it's not going to work for all of them.
mhm,
And then when they're not performing in a certain way, we found it was hard. Renee especially would find, like, in a uh, timing when she'd have to redirect a team member on something, it seems like it would be like her thought versus the team member's thought, right?
mhm,
Well, I feel like you did it this way. Whereas you're then able to more objectively say, when you did this, one of our core values is compassion.
mhm,
And when you said this, it didn't strike me as very compassionate.
mhm,
Would
mhm.
you agree? And then you could have a debate
Yeah.
over the value and take it off of the person. Because
Mm,
if you get critical and say, when you said this, you weren't showing compassion, well, now you're criticizing them, right? You're
yeah.
saying, you're telling, they're hearing. Anyone who's with kids knows this very well. Use a lot of these strategies that we've talked about so far. You use with kids too. But
Yeah.
if you don't have that defined value, then they take it personally. Whereas
Mhm,
now it's not personal, just like it's not personal if
mhm,
they didn't follow the protocol properly in
mhm,
terms of being able to say that there was a person who didn't train them properly.
mhm.
Now it's an issue with a standard operating procedure. It's an issue
Right.
with core value. It's
Yep.
an issue with a responsibility, and we can focus on how we get that right versus I think you're bad. And that's what a
Right.
lot of times happens is the employee boss dynamic, the chief Indian dynamic is you didn't do what you're supposed to do. You're bad. And I know, because I made the mistakes many times, no matter what I discussed with them, no matter how, I never was a yeller. I never was aggressive with team members ever. They
Mhm.
would literally come out and tell their team members, "Oh my God, Dr. Mike's so mad at me. He got so mad at me." I'm like, and so stuff comes back to you. I'm like, so mad. I'm like, I just told her I
Like,
would have liked to see her do this a little differently, but
yeah.
that was her interpretation. Whereas if it could be like, this isn't
Mm,
upholding a core value.
right.
Friendliness, another core value. If you're
Yeah.
being rude to your team members, it's not friend. You're not upholding a core value.
Mhm,
Friendliness is part of our value system here.
mhm.
So we ended up having them put up on the wall. We had a big old Victorian home, so we had nice, like 15-foot ceilings, and so
Mm,
we had them up on the wall in big cursive letters that we had a local shop that made our signs do vinyl. And they just put them up there, and we
yeah.
had them put out throughout the reception room. And so all our patients could see them as well. And
Mhm.
those were our values. And
Right.
so we, even in the interview process, one of the first things Renee would ask them is, here are our core values. And she'd list them out. Please pick
Mhm.
3 that you most identify with and explain why.
I love it.
And it
Absolutely
was a
love it.
nice way to just start to see, like, can this person eat? Are they
Yes.
going to be like, what core values? Or like, well, that's kind of corny. Okay, then you're
Yeah.
not for us. Like, you're not going to work with this. You're not going to be a fit for this team. So those are the things that the core values allow you to do. And
Mhm.
the other thing about that is, though, if you're going to have these core values, the leaders in your practice, including the doctor, especially the doctor, and doctors darn well better
Yep.
live by them,
Walk the
because
walk.
yeah, if
Absolutely.
you're not, then that hypocrisy and that
Yep.
inauthenticity will
Yeah.
show through so clearly to your team. And then when you do try to correct them for that value, again, just like with your kids, right? If
Mhm.
you're telling them you need to do something and it's something you don't do, right? If you're telling your kids you don't lie and you're always lying, then your
Yeah.
kids are like, well, where do you get off telling me that you lie all the time? So,
Right.
you can't, you have to be careful that you pick core values that you can uphold. You
Yeah.
can't just, last thing, we let our team members pick the core values when we did eventually do that. I think we were probably,
Mhm.
geez, don't quote me, but maybe like 7, 8 years
Yeah.
into practice when we
Mhm.
did it. We actually did it as a group exercise to
Yes.
pick our core values. So
Yeah, no, and that was, you must have heard that question inside my head. That's what I was thinking. Many times, someone at the top writes their core values and it's, 6 pages long and
mm,
everybody's like rolling their eyes. It
yep,
means absolutely nothing to nobody.
yep,
But if you bring everybody in as a team and it is literally, what do we want to build here?
right,
I've always said inside my team that I'm willing to fire anyone, and we'll call it bad behavior, which
mm,
does not meet with our core values. Repeatedly just, stomps all over our
mm,
core values over and over again. That I'm willing to fire for versus firing somebody for doing something wrong, right? Because if they're doing
Same.
something wrong, you have a coaching moment. You have a
Yes.
moment to say, let's discuss what went wrong there.
Yep.
And I think really that speaks volumes to how you want each person to treat one another.
Yeah.
Never mind even beyond the inside internal works, right? Which is like, how do we treat our patients, right? So I think it's a lot of work.
It is.
And it takes time, but the efficiency that comes from it, and then the culture that you create from it, and the ability to have those conversations beyond you did something bad to saying just rising above it and just rediscussing the core values, takes away the pointing of the finger. And I think that's huge in leadership.
And it is a lot of work up front. I find it's the way many things are, whether you're learning a new technique clinically. I mean, heck, just becoming an orthodontist is an insane amount of work up front. The benefit of that is, though, once you've implemented it for anything we've talked about so far, it's so much less work than it was before. So it's again, taking it to the analogy with kids, right? When you instill that discipline and structure in your children when they're young, as they grow, you have a much better chance to, and I saw this not even with my own children who are now heading towards college age, but or one in college now and one going to be is a sophomore now. So in high school, but I saw it not only in them, right, that it was well worth a lot of the structure and discipline we built, and the timeouts and all the times it would have been just easier to just say, well, they're just a kid, or let them do this. Well, and I saw it in my practice with parents all the time. The parents the kids were young and the kids are just running around the office and there's no consequences. Those kids turn out to be much harder to control, and it's much more work on the parent when they're older. It's no different in your practice. If you don't have discipline and structure and rules and uphold them fairly and consistently, then it might be easier initially because you're like, oh, everything's great, but just wait. It's eventually going to be so much harder because you don't have. And then when you do, you brought up having to let someone go. When you do have to let them go, that was always a weakness of mine. I just, in a small office, I mean, we had 15 to at most 20 people. We were family or small group. Some people had been there for many years, and it was just always so hard when you had to do that. And I always dreaded the fallout and the next day and the huddle and where's so-and-so, and then some knew already, some didn't. It was never something I enjoyed. Probably actually my least favorite part about being the boss and running a practice. That being said, it did get easier. Still, I didn't enjoy it or look forward to it, but it got easier when we had these objective measures, because when it was subjective, it became like you'd say, we need to let you go. These are the things that we've noticed, and for those reasons, we need to let you go. You no longer have a spot on our team. We wish you all the best, and so forth. When it was about things you could hold them to objectively, failure to consistently failure to uphold your responsibilities on your responsibilities list, consistently not following protocols, and now as a result causing issues with patient safety or other team member safety, right? Or putting our practice in a situation of liability, or not upholding our core values and stating them by doing this. That's and again, I'm not saying we did this when they did it once or twice. This had to be, we probably gave people way too much rope. Not probably, I definitely gave people too much rope, and so did Renee. We were not quick enough with that trigger to let people go when we should have a lot of times. That being said, when we did let them go, it was much easier to have that conversation, because you could just say, it's not me, you, it's not, I don't like you. It's not, you're a bad person. It's, you don't fit within the culture of this team based on A, B, C, D. And for that reason, we have to let you go. Today was your last day. So it's never a pleasant part of it, but it got easier when we had all these objective measures in place.
And many times if someone's stomping all over your core values, everybody else in the team is probably not enjoying that. And so the idea that you are letting someone go because even someone that stomps on core values can be fired is a valuable lesson that's how serious you are about your core values, right? And you probably only needed to do that once. for everybody to go, uh-oh,
Yep.
right? You
Yep.
know, a lot of what you're saying here almost makes me think that when you start out in practice, and as much as you probably just like a startup, right? Like money's tight, of course.
Mhm.
But it makes me think, you know, a lot of this is like a business degree, right? You need someone that has a business degree. And it sounds to me like Renee has her head screwed on straight when it comes to this sort of stuff. So you
Yeah.
guys were able to you were able to build out sort of that orthodontic side, and then she was able to guide you from that business side. So that was a
Yeah.
really great support system that you had for each other. But it makes you think people starting out that perhaps that's who they need to hire. They need
Yeah.
to hire a partner or be in partnership. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I never could have done it without Renee's support
Mm.
from a manpower standpoint alone, just what she dealt with on the front end. And she built all the insurance protocols
Yeah.
and
Oh,
collections
yeah.
protocols and patient phone call protocol. You know, she did all of that. That in addition to that, her background as an occupational therapist, they
Mhm.
break things down and try to solve problems. That's what they
Mhm.
have to do. They have to figure out ways to do it, and oftentimes in a way that is fun and you know and can be almost a game or play. So she was very good at being able to see, and I genuinely think women are better at that part than men. You know, men tend to be the doers, get me in there, I'll do it and fix it. Women are kind of like, let's figure this out and like how we're going to do this.
So
And
true.
so I would be much more like, let's just do, you know, and she's like, they need to see this. They need to have this laid out like this. That's why this
Mhm.
particular person is struggling, because there's no direction. So it did help me. I would never have been able to have the success and the balance and the structure that I had, even though I'm an extremely structured person. I wasn't good at teaching that structure to people who weren't structured,
Mm.
if that makes sense.
Interesting.
So I
Yes.
wasn't good at, I mean, if someone else was structured, no problem, right? I could
Right.
show them and teach them and they would be structured. No, but when the people weren't by their nature super structured, and no matter what you do, when you get a big enough team, not everybody's going to have the structure and discipline that you might want, right? It's just, you're just not going to have a team built of all those people. So the key is how do you get the people who aren't that way to perform at a high level? And that's where, when Renee showed me what she was doing with the front end manual and building those protocols, I then did that with the clinical manual. And I mean, it was a lot of work. For updating manuals, I get that question a lot from people when I
Yes.
coach, is how do you update them? Because that's pretty onerous too. So the
Yes.
process we went by was, whenever we were there, and everybody's responsibility was, and when you do have a practice, just by the nature of today's workforce, you have more turnover than, you know, people move, they're
Yeah.
only there for a short period of time, or they have a child and they don't want to come back to work, or whatever it is, you have turnover. So, or you're just growing and you're just adding more people. I
Mhm.
found that was the best time, when you were training someone new, that you
Yes.
would realize if your protocol had morphed. Because what happens in any business, in any office, is people will learn it one way, but then as humans, you kind of evolve and say like, well, geez, if I do this, it's a little quicker. Or maybe if I just do this, it's kind of a shortcut. And I'm not saying a shortcut in a bad way. I'm saying it's a good way. It's like driving, right? You
Right.
drive one way all the time. But then you're like, well, geez, if I take this back road, I could get there a little faster.
Right.
If you don't, at the time, most people aren't going to be like, oh, I've got to tell Dr. Mike, we've got to update this protocol. But when you're training someone new,
Right.
I would empower all my team members that if you're going through training and you are like, oh, wait, this isn't how we do it, you rip the manual. We had all these digitally, but we also had them printed out in binders. So the records room protocols for how to take the ICATs and the pictures, there was a binder in the records room for every step of that.
Mhm.
Clinical protocols, clinic, front end team member protocols, front end team, printed as well. And they would pull them, they'd rip it out of the binder. They would write on it what needed to be fixed and where it needed to be fixed. And they would
Mhm.
submit it to Renee or myself. And then I could go in. I was the only one that edited clinical protocols. Renee or I were the only ones that edited front end protocols. Doesn't have to be the doctor's spouse, but it has to be you. When I tried it with letting just team members update them, I did try
Right.
to empower them and say, oh, just Lorraine, it just made chaos out of it. They
Right.
would delete the file by mistake. It's not their job. You know, they're
Yeah.
not in an admin position. There's certain
Mhm.
things admin you need to do. So your admin team, even a clinical director, could certainly handle it. But your top of the food chain people really need to be the ones that are making those
Mhm.
updates. So I would go in, I would make the update, I would print it, show it to them, say, is this, work now?
Right.
And if it was, I would give it to them to go file it back in the binder and say, here you go, file it back. And you know what? Sometimes that might be a JWD opportunity,
Yeah.
because it may be a
Yeah.
$25 one, but like, hey, look, um, Susie was training this newer person and realized that the protocol was off.
Yeah.
And she recognized that, because now next time Susie trains, she's going to be looking to scrutinize the protocol to find when it's off. And even though that makes my life a little harder to have to update it, it makes my life easier because
Easier
that
in the
new
long run.
person is going to
Yeah.
know the right way to do it. And so
Yeah.
will the new person after that and after that.
Yeah.
So again, it's just like a mindset change that you have to go through on this.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that initially. So we built all the protocols, right? And then we
Yes.
weren't updating
Yes.
them.
Yes.
And then the
That's
new
the
team
hard
members
part.
come in. Yeah. And they're like, well, I went off
Haven't
the
we
protocol.
changed that? Do we do that the same? We just hired someone ourselves, in fact, and we went through a very similar process.
Mm.
We were like, oh, some of those need to be updated. And not only that, but an opportunity to sort of reevaluate. There's maybe a better way of doing that,
Yeah.
or maybe the person coming on board had an idea. So you just
Yes.
have
Yes.
this thought process at a
Yep.
moment in time to allow you to make sure but I love the idea that if, someone's catching it, that's a reward moment. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that I would be in that book all day long, if I
Yeah.
needed,
Right.
like a new pair of shoes.
Absolutely.
Be like,
Like you
how,
would,
how can I get enough money at the end of the year to be able to go on vacation? I'm going to make Dr. DeLuke pay for my vacation this year. You're
yeah.
going to have a lot of fun with that. And that's a
Yeah.
lot of what Dr. Jackson did when she created Retainers for Life. She said, all right, if this is going to sit chairside inside an orthodontic practice and someone's going to go to the time of saying the word Retainers for Life to the patient, they should be bonused for that. You
Mhm.
get a yes from the patient, they should be bonus. And I thought, oh,
Yep.
wow, there's no beyond the internal workings of your practice. Most companies don't do stuff like that. So
Right.
it's like very unique.
No, I agree.
And talking of being unique, which I think sort of slides us into, there's, I had a couple of more topics here. You are well known for early treatment, airway discussions, and, what would you have told yourself at 29 years old to sort of explore that world? Tell me more about that.
So it was a journey going
Yeah.
on this. And so I don't know that I could have bypassed a lot of the stages of the journey,
Mm.
truthfully,
Mm-hmm.
because at each stage of the journey, it wasn't like it was this epiphany one day.
Mm.
I said, man, I got to think differently. So it was a journey, but if I had to do something differently, I really wish I had an awareness. I had a phase one mentality right from the beginning. I don't know why.
Mm.
And we've talked a little bit about this, won't go into great detail, but I just would see these patients coming into my practice young. And when you're in a residency, you really don't see many young patients. And if you do, chances are they're on state funding, so you can't treat them unless they have a severe malocclusion because of the Saltzman index. So you're kind of forced to just try to watch and wait and grow and hope they grow well and pull teeth. And so you get out of private practice and you get a 6 or 7-year-old walking in your door and mom or dad are like, well, what do we do? The dentist sent them, they've got these crowded teeth. And so I just started thinking early on, well, if I pull teeth, I'm just treating the symptom here. I mean, there's no, clearly these arches in these jaws are narrow. Clearly their teeth aren't too big. Clearly they don't have too many of them. It's just the ones they have don't fit because of the small framework.
Mm-hmm.
So I had this mentality early on that I needed to help start these patients growing younger. So what I didn't understand is the implications that had on their airway and overall health. Mm. I also didn't understand how even mouth breathing can cause neurocognitive deficits, behavioral problems, especially at night. And there's studies, Karen Bonnick in 2012, and we had a very famous study, almost 10,000 subjects, and showed 4 to 7 years old, and showed the mouth breathing, even mouth breathers, not obstructive sleep apnea, even mouth breathers and snorers had behavioral challenges. David Gozal, who's the dean of the medical school at Marshall, he's been amazing in the airway arena, and he's a physician. And he had a study in 2016 where Journal American Respiratory and Critical Care Medicine, that he said that he was 5 to 7 year olds, looked at 1,010 of them, and determined that even snoring alone leads to neurocognitive deficits in that age patient population. Look at over 1,000 patients. Another one, Isaiah, had the adolescent brain cognitive development study, looked at over 10,000 patients in that study, and found that patients who snored, again, we're not even talking about obstructive sleep apnea, had even gasping in their
Mm.
sleep had decreases in gray matter
Hmm.
and neurocognitive
Isn't that
deficits that
amazing?
led and
Yeah.
translated to academic challenges. So those are things, I mean, yes, all what I just quoted came out after
Yeah.
I started practicing. So, but even now, Lorraine, young docs aren't learning this.
Mhm.
This is what I do now. I teach this. I go out and explain this, and they're like, look at me with this look of what? And I'm yeah,
Right.
it is all in the medical literature. We didn't.
Yeah.
Isaiah's article was in Nature Communication, so these aren't orthodontic journals. This information is in. So I was helping these patients,
Yeah.
but not enough because I wasn't, and cone beam wasn't out then either. I'm old enough that a lot of these things weren't around when I started, but the cone beam wasn't. So I wasn't like airway aware. I didn't even really know. I didn't look at their breathing. I didn't look at all the other signs that they may not be breathing well, allergic
Right.
shiners and chapped lips and gums and all of these things
Mm.
that I now know and teach. So there were kids out there that I just went in. I did better than just pulling teeth and leaving them narrow. I helped them grow to a normal arch width and made room for their teeth and was definitely helping because I had parents say to me, like, do you think it's a coincidence that like Johnny sleeps better and he's not waking up in the middle of the night gasping and snoring? And we used to hear him. We go on vacation and we had to get a separate room for one of us would take turns staying in that room with Johnny because we'd be up all night because he was snoring so loudly. And that's not happening anymore. And I would literally say, I mean, I guess it could be like we're making room for the tongue and it kind of made
Right.
sense, but I would say I don't really know. And I certainly wasn't looking for it. So I wish I realized that sooner.
Mm.
And I wish I understood the impact I was having on these patients on an overall systemic level a little bit sooner. I wish I was a little more aware of adenoid and tonsillar hypertrophy, allergies, and getting these patients to the allergist and ENT sooner. Because there are a lot of patients out there that I didn't recognize this stuff on.
Mm.
And it wasn't until, probably about 5 years in that I started to get a little more aware. And then really when I got my cone beam in 2014, so about 10 years in, I started to really become aware of this and really be able to more proactively help people.
But I think, the wisdom that you would tell your younger self, that pearl is to keep pushing, keep learning,
Mhm.
Don't accept the norm,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Continue the mindset of continuing to grow as an
Yeah.
orthodontist, which I think many orthodontists, I see, of course, many orthodontists going to conventions and, certainly trying their best to continue their education.
Mhm.
But even, a lot of times, when we talk about airway, there is misconceptions. I mean, what would you believe is like, the main misconception?
That the orthodontist plays no role in
Yeah,
in airway
interesting.
at all, even just
Yeah,
detecting it and getting it to the
yeah,
physicians. That's the biggest misconception. People that
yeah,
say if you want to understand airway, be a physician. That's it's a common belief in our
yeah,
profession.
right.
Um,
But
and
you sit in such a central seat, right? As in you're inside the patient's mouth at very specific times. So you have an opportunity. You're
mhm,
in that special seat that gives you key opportunity to have that knowledge to take it
mhm.
somewhere,
Yep.
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Very interesting. Very
Yeah.
interesting. So I know that we always say bring 5 words of wisdom,
Mhm.
and your fifth one, do you remember what it is?
Yes, be critical of your own work. Don't just finish these cases and turn your head and look for the next one to start. And yeah, that is something that it's a word, it's words of wisdom. It's something I by default did, but don't think I did with enough of a critical eye. I would almost do it like kind of like turning, like looking like they'd almost hide the things that weren't quite right. You could convince yourself that the case went perfectly. You're a younger doc. You think you know it all. You think you've been top of your school. You've gone through all this training as most orthodontists have, and you come out and you're a little full of yourself and you treat a case and it's hard for you to look at your own work and think there's something wrong with it. And oftentimes it's quite good. So you're like, but
Right.
you haven't done it enough to know, maybe have as many challenging cases as you're going to have, and also know that you could even be better. And so what I realized is for me, what I started doing and kind of the pearl I'll give people is if you want to hold yourself to account and you want to make sure that you always are putting your best work forward, make it your standard protocol to send before and after pictures,
Mm.
not just the afters, but send the afters, send the composite 8,
Right.
but also send, and we would send a pan too, and also send the comparison side by side, whether it's smile open bite, if they were really class 2, give them a buckle shot before and after. If you did some beautiful arch expansion and development, give them and change the shape of the palate. In a phase 1, give them a maxillary occlusal before and after. Get known for that. It'll do a couple things. It'll grow your practice. You won't ever have to advertise, because when you send that to the dentist and send that to the parent or patient, I am not joking. I would go over to family friends or family members or people's houses where our kids were friends. And you'd go over for a birthday party, be on their refrigerator. You would
That's
see,
amazing.
you would see these. We got known for having these amazing before and afters.
Yeah.
So what is the other thing that does? It makes you take really high quality pictures. And that's something, again, I came realization a couple years in, but I was kind of on the edge of digital. When I was in my residency, we just started using digital. It was kind of new. So I wasn't super great at dialing it in. And when I teach now, I have all my cases from all my time in practice. And some of the older ones, I look back and the lighting is off and there's blur in the back and I didn't have the f-stop set just right. And I can't even blame my assistants, because early in my practice, it was just me doing that when I started with nothing. So I would say, I wish I knew how important it was to really get amazing pictures on these patients and then send those before and afters, because when you're finishing that case and you think you want to stop because they don't want to push through to get that last little bit of tip or torque or get it right because you're busy and it's just easier to get this patient's braces off. When you've got to send that and it's going blown up, and we would send it digitally too, as we
it's going on the fridge. Yeah.
Going on the fridge. And then we would send the digital ones to the GPs and we would send a duplicate digitally to the parents. And they're going to look at it on their phone. They're going to blow it up. They're going to look at everything. You better make sure you're doing darn good work. And I think that's a really valuable exercise. If I could teach my younger self and teach younger docs to do, you will just find that you're holding yourself to a higher standard. It's kind of like the psychological statement that if you want to make sure you're going to commit to something, tell somebody you're going to do it.
Right.
Say it out loud, because the chances are you hear yourself do it. And so now that person, you feel that you have to uphold it and be accountable to them. When you're sending it out there, you're accountable.
Well, I have loved all of this. Now, you had said there was some things on your website, theorthocoach.com. And then what email address? So let's just say there's a young orthodontist out there and he has a specific question. Do you have an email address that they could use?
Yes, they can use Dr. Mike, so just DrMike at theorthocoach.com, and people can reach out to me anytime on that. If you go to the website, theorthocoach.com, there's a contact button there too. If they forget the email and they can contact, it'll come to my email as well. And I do a lot of times for people, if they just have some general questions, because I do offer coaching. If people just have general questions and want to learn a little more about the coaching I offer, I'll give them a free session just to try it. I mean, and I do that for people all the time. If you have a specific case, if you call me and say, I have a case I want to go over, well, obviously that's a coaching session. But if you're just like, I just want to kind of get a feel for what you even do, and here's some problems I'm going through, I just want to see if you can help me. Let me know. I can send you a code and we can hop on a session at no charge and just kind of talk to you about that. And then I have a lot of CE on my site as well that gets into the real details of a lot of this. So
I love it. Well, thank you so much for sharing. Those were amazing tips. And just think how much you would have slept more over those years had you had implemented it earlier.
Oh, you're so right. Yeah. If I'd only known,
I should change the name of this from Dear Younger Self to this is how I would have slept better.
Yeah. Less
webinar.
Decrease stress. How could I have decreased my stress over my career?
Well, I appreciate you so much. And again, thanks again. And let's, if you think of more stuff, I'm so excited to see what all the rest of our guests come up. And it's all very different, which is
interesting,
shocking, right?
Yeah.
But thank you again. Much appreciated.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Lorraine. Really appreciate it.